Hi, this is Randy Landry, and this is my 16th installment on my podcast, Common Sense and Ramblings in America. I'm going to be doing a reading that I posted on my blog, which is common-sense-in-america.com, that I posted last week. It's become, actually, I wrote this article a couple of months ago, and I've done some updates on it, and I just posted it. But it's a seminal event that's occurring that I think is quite important and prevalent, like for today. This is Did Kerry collude with Iran? And I'm going to read some excerpts from my article. As usual, my articles are a little bit long, and if I were to read them completely, it would take well more than my 20 or so minutes that I try to allot for them. Okay, so this is how it starts. Did former U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, as a private citizen, collude with Iran in order to undermine then President Donald Trump and save the nuclear deal? Okay, here. So, Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif met with multiple current Biden administration officials several years ago to undermine former President Trump's dealings with the country, a report claims. One of the meetings between Zarif and Robert Malley, now the special envoy for Iran policy, took place in 2019 after Trump withdrew the U.S. from the Obama era Iran nuclear deal. The Washington Times reported Sunday former Secretary of State John Kerry also met with Zarif in the few years of Trump's presidency, which he had publicly acknowledged, and so did Obama era Energy Secretary Ernest Moniz, the reporter said. WNU editor, former Secretary of State John Kerry, has confirmed that he has met with Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif in the first few years of Trump's presidency. I am sure they did not meet to discuss weather. The optics, to punt it bluntly, are not good. Remember when Senator Tom Cotton sending a warning letter to Iran was denounced as a Logan Act violation? Secretary of State, whose entire career has been one long Logan Act violation, threw in his 2 cents. My reaction to the letter was utter disbelief, Kerry said. During my 29 years here in the Senate, I have never heard of, nor even heard of it being proposed, anything comparable to this. If I had, I can guarantee you, no matter what the issue, and no matter who was president, I would have certainly rejected it. Nobody is questioning anybody's right to dissent, Kerry added, but to write to the leaders in the middle of a negotiation, particularly the leaders that they have criticized, are the people for who are engaging with, and suggest that they are going to give a constitutional lesson, which, by the way, was absolutely incorrect, is quite stunning. This letter ignores more than 2 centuries of precedents in the conduct of American foreign policy. He sat down at the United Nations with Foreign Minister Javad Zarif to discuss ways of preserving the pact limiting Iran's nuclear weapons program. It was the second time in about 2 months that the two had met to strategize over salvaging a deal that he spent years negotiating during the Obama administration, according to a person briefed on the meetings. Utter disbelief. Except, of course, he had done with the Viet Cong while not in office, and with the Sandinistas while in office. Now he's negotiating illegally with his Iranian collaborator. Kerry said, also met last month with German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier, and he's been on the phone with top European Union official Federica Mogherini, according to the source, who spoke on the condition of anonymity to reveal the private meetings. Kerry has also met with French President Emmanuel Macron in both Paris and New York, conversing over the details of sanctions and regional nuclear threats in both French and English. If the Dems want us to take the Logan Act seriously, lock them up. With the Iran deal facing its gravest threat since it was signed in 2015, Kerry has been on an aggressive yet stealthy mission to preserve it, using his deep list of contacts gleaned during his time as the top U.S. diplomat to try to apply pressure on the Trump administration from the outside. putting pressure on the United States government in collaboration with foreign regimes, some of them, like Iran, hostile. You know what's a good term for that? Collusion. I'm waiting for the FBI to raid his home, office, and hotel room, spy on his phone calls, despite the communications with a terrorist state. I doubt anyone at the NSA is listening, and force him to spend hundreds of thousands on legal bills. The law is supposed to apply equally to both parties, isn't it? And if the Dems want to hunt for Russian collusion, Putin is the guy behind Iran. So Kerry can be said to be colluding with Russia. So where are the midnight raids? But here is the Boston Globe's talking up Kerry's echo chamber. Kerry is coordinating his push with a group of officials who are his top advisors at the State Department and who helped craft it and negotiate the Iran deal in the first place. The group, called Diplomacy Works, has an advisory council that includes lead Iran deal negotiator Wendy Sherman, former State Department Chief of Staff John Feiner, and former spokeswoman Jen Psaki. The group claims to be responsible for 100 news articles, 34 television and radio hits, and 37 opinion pieces on the Iran question. They do fact checks of criticisms of the agreement and blast them out to an email list of nearly 4,000 policymakers and foreign policy experts. Stephen Vladek, a law professor at the University of Texas, said, "The law is a red herring since it has never been used to prosecute anyone, and almost certainly would not apply to anything Kerry is doing. The act only applies to conduct that is designed to defeat the measures of the United States or influence the conduct of foreign governments," Vladek said. "If all Kerry is doing is working to keep in place something that's still technically a measure of the United States, I don't see how the statute would apply, even if someone was crazy enough to try it." As the Boston Globe's own story states, Kerry is trying to influence the conduct of foreign governments while using them to apply pressure on the United States government. Let's see that NSA eavesdropping in FBI raids, or do those only apply to people protecting this country against the left? Pompeo Trump claims that Kerry violated Logan's Act is true, according to Pompeo. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said he believes President Trump was correct when he suggested former Secretary of State John Kerry violated the Logan Act. It's true. I was there in Munich. I saw not only Kerry and others met with the Iranian leadership, Pompeo said during an appearance on Fox and Friends. It's unusual, but more importantly, it's wrong. The secretary was commenting on an explosive assertion from Trump earlier this month that Kerry committed a treasonous act when he reportedly was engaged in secret talks with Iranian diplomats in an attempt to salvage the Iran nuclear deal after the current administration mixed it. What I would like to see with Iran, I would like to see them call me John Kerry. He speaks to them a lot. John Kerry tells them not to call. That is a violation of the Logan Act, and frankly, he should be prosecuted on that, Trump said. The Logan Act forbids unauthorized persons from negotiating with foreign governments. That's the premise, anyway. The U.S. relationship with Iran has been strained in recent months amid conflicting reports about credible threats. U.S. military and intelligence officials say the powerful regime poses to American assets in the region and around the world. The Trump administration has dismissed rumors of infighting among top staffers on how to deal with Iran, while Republicans on Capitol Hill have accused Democrats of secretly negotiating with Iranian representatives. Every American should support Americans' foreign policy, Pompeo said. They had their moment. They had their day. It's time to get off the stage. Trump has taken a hard line on Iran since taking office, declaring a section of the nation's military a terrorist organization and pulling out of an Obama-era nuclear deal he decried as disastrous. Pompeo said what Kerry was allegedly engaged in with Iran was risky at best. These acts border, we all know, the Logan Act, he said. We all know the risk that is taken when people act as private citizens on behalf of the United States government. John Kerry has never gotten out of bed with Iran. Failed former Secretary of State John Kerry spent so much time wooing Iran Foreign Minister Javad Zarif during the Obama administration that people started talking. After years of public canoodling, romantic garden strolls, and secret pallets of cold, hard American cash sent under the cover of night. Monsieur Kerry never could get Mr. Zarif and the Iranians to kick their habit of bank rolling terrorism around the globe. With the election of Donald Trump, the world through Monsieur Kerry had finally given up his lusty pursuit of Mr. Zarif. Turns out they had just gotten a room. A shocking new report by the Washington Times reveals that Monsieur Kerry get his torrid bromance with Mr. Zarif during the entire Trump administration. These relationships blossomed into what high-level national security and intelligence sources say allowed the Iranian regime to bypass Mr. Trump and work directly with Obama administration veterans that Tehran hoped would soon return to power in Washington. According to the report, it was a flagrant violation of the Logan Act, that antique law so preciously revered back when Democrats were trying to throw Trump's officials in jail. Remember General Mike Flynn, Mr. Trump's national security advisor, whose phone calls with Russia's U.S. ambassador were tapped by American intelligence services? Collusion, they screamed. Then Vice President Joe Biden, in an Oval Office meeting with President Obama and top intelligence officials, floated the idea of jailing Mr. Flynn for violating the Logan Act. The Logan Act bars private citizens from conducting a shadow diplomacy with foreign countries in contravention of official U.S. diplomacy. Thin gruel, to be sure, especially since, as Mr. Trump's incoming top security advisor, Mr. Flynn has every right to begin talking with foreign officials about the upcoming administration. What Monsieur Kerry and other washouts from the Obama administration were doing with Iran was much, much different. They were actively undermining the foreign policy of an elected administration, and they were doing that after voters had clearly chosen a starkly different path for dealing with the terrorist mullahs of Iran. Although details of Mr. Zarif's face-to-face conversations with leading Democrats remain murky, one former senior U.S. official told the Times that the Iranian foreign minister held meetings throughout the Trump years in 2017, 2018, and 2019, according to the report. The underlying goals of Mr. Zarif's meeting, the official said, was to devise a political strategy to undermine the Trump administration and to continue building up a reservoir of support for the Iran nuclear deal, or another like it, that could be drawn up if a Democrat returned to the White House in 2021. By any measure, these clandestine efforts violated the Logan Act, not to mention flagrant collusion with an avowed enemy of the United States. And perhaps another thing, treason. John Kerry blasted as anti-American for secret meetings with Iran. Former Trump State Department official and Iranian refugee Eli Konim is calling the move anti-American and pushing back on the Biden administration's latest capitulation to the regime. What John Kerry did is anti-American. He's demonstrated a very cozy relationship with Iran, and one cannot help but think about what happened with General Flynn, who was in office and punished for having conversations with foreign governments. John Kerry did this when he was out of office. You have to wonder what exactly was it John Kerry was advising the Iranians, because the Trump administration wanted to hold the Iranians accountable with a maximum pressure campaign, which was the strongest pressure campaign in history against a rogue regime. So what exactly was it that Kerry was telling them? Konim said during an interview with Fox and Friends, the maximum pressure campaign worked. The Iranians are at the weakest point in 43 years. They have been devastated in their economy. The Iranian people have taken to the streets and protested over and over again, and the Iranian regime is struggling with COVID. The Iranian regime is on verge of collapse. They're the ones who need the United States. The Biden administration has been practicing what I call diplomatic malpractice. We need to stop making unilateral concessions to the Iranian regime, she continued. In conclusion, it is pretty evident that John Kerry worked against President Trump and his presidency. He apparently had insider information in his knowledge of the 2020 election outcome. So he was able to reassure Iran that things would change in 2021 when Biden was in charge. Now that Biden is president and Kerry is in a position of power again, plans are being drawn up for relationships with Iran. All I know is that we will be negotiating from a position of weakness. It is also evident to any but the blind that any relationship with Iran will be hurtful to any agreements made with other Middle-Eastern countries under President Trump. But that doesn't matter so long as we can marginalize any accomplishments of President Trump. They still don't realize that while they can undo his accomplishments, they can't erase them. So only time will tell what the future holds for us. What I do know is that anything that happened under the Obama presidency will be nothing compared to what will happen under the Biden-Harris presidency. Now, I have some updates here. Okay, in 4/27/2021, I updated this article. Calls are growing for President Joe Biden's climate czar John Kerry to be investigated and to resign over accusations that he told Iran about Israeli military operations while serving as the Secretary of State under former President Barack Obama. He is a bad boy. This is something that deserves a Senate investigation, Senator Marsha Blackburn told Fox News, adding that Kerry has put our men and women in uniform at risk. This is something quite serious, Blackburn, a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, said. This is someone who has served our nation at very high levels, that had information whether as a senator or a secretary of state, and knew it was happening on the diplomatic and military front. To give that information to someone who is an adversary is something of tremendous concern to me. The outcry over Kerry comes after Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif claimed in a leaked audio tape that while Kerry was Secretary of State, he revealed more than 200 operations that Israel had conducted against Iranian targets. Kerry has also reportedly met with Zarif as a private citizen after leaving office, which is raising concern about what he may have told him and other Iranian officials. In a statement posted to Twitter Monday, Kerry called the allegations being made about him unequivocally false. I can tell you that this story and these allegations are unequivocally false, Kerry said, while retweeting posts by Washington Post reporter John Hudson concerning the conservative backlash over the reports from Iran. This never happened, either when I was Secretary of State or since. A U.S. official, President Envoy for Climate, Kerry's post is a cabinet-level position that wasn't subject to Senate confirmation. Morgan Ortagus, the spokesperson for the State Department under President Donald Trump, told Fox News and Friends Tuesday, that Zarif is Iran's chief propagandist, but there are a lot of problems with Kerry's conversations with the key Iranian official. Joe Biden did an interview with PBS a few years ago where he talked about the fact that John Kerry and Zarif used to talk to each other on Kerry's cell phone, said Ortagus. When I worked with Secretary Mike Pompeo, you always went through the State Department Operations Center for calls between foreign ministers, between leaders, so that way there is a transcript and people know what's being said. Kerry has also a pattern of undermining Israel, said Ortagus. There is some very, very odd pattern of behavior where John Kerry seems to be beholden to the Iranians and works at every inch he can against Israel. Two lawmakers have called for Kerry to resign. Senator Dan Sullivan said on the Senate floor that it's become clear that our adversaries, whether Beijing or Iran, like it when John Kerry is in charge of foreign policy and national security. Why? Because they know how to use him to their advantage. Representative Mike Gallagher agreed, tweeting that Kerry should resign if Zarif's claims turn out to be true. Meanwhile, Mort Klein, president of the Zionist Organization for America, told Fox News that there should be an immediate and thorough investigation into Kerry and Bryant E. Lieb, the executive director for Iranian Americans for Liberty, said that if Zarif's allegations turn out to be true, they are grounds for treason, charges against Kerry. State Department spokesman Ned Price declined to speculate on the authenticity of the tape, but said that the governments involved were speaking publicly on the record. The Kerry controversy has surfaced while the Biden administration is in negotiations to rejoin the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, also known as the Iran nuclear deal. Trump pulled the United States out of that deal. Blackburn has also introduced a bill to stop the Biden administration from re-entering the nuclear deal with Iran, unless the matter is submitted to the Senate for a vote first. What worries me a good deal is how these despotic regimes are emboldened to push back against the United States, she said. We need to send a strong message to our adversaries in this new axis of evil of Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea that we are going to push back on them and we will not let them win. Okay, that concludes my article on John Kerry. There is some addendum stuff in here, but I'm not going to read that because I'm getting at my 20 minutes limit here. So, as always, I hope you be safe and don't give up the fight. And I hope you found this reading of my posting interesting and possibly beneficial. So take care, guys. And until I discuss another article, I will talk to you next week. Thank you.